A powerful woman begins to lose her strength inside her own home, surrounded by luxury and silence. While everyone believes it's just the weight of age, something invisible is happening behind the scenes. A seemingly caring presence starts to control every detail of her life, but a watchful eye notices that this fragility might not be natural. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. New York never sleeps. The city pulses day and night, like a giant heart that beats without stopping. On the wide avenues, cars rush by. In the narrow alleys, life moves at a slower pace. And it's precisely in this contrast, in this dance between luxury and struggle, that our story begins. On the Upper East Side, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Manhattan, stands an imposing townhouse. Its high walls guard impeccable gardens, marble fountains, and an architecture that blends the classic with the modern. Here, silence has a different weight. It's an expensive silence protected by cameras and electronic gates, a silence that hides more than it reveals. Inside this mansion lives Mrs. Helen Davenport Sterling, a 73-year-old woman whose last name carries the weight of generations. A widow for nearly 10 years, she and her husband built a real estate empire. Decades of work, of tough decisions, of sacrifices, shaped not only the family's fortune, but also Helen's strong personality. She had always been a determined woman, with firm opinions, capable of leading meetings and negotiations with the same elegance she used to choose flowers for the living room. But time, that relentless master, began to take its toll. In recent months, Mrs. Sterling was no longer the same. Her gaze, once sharp and decisive, now seemed lost on some distant point. Her steps, once firm on the marble hallway, became slow and unsteady. She felt a constant weakness, a dizziness that came without warning, an exhaustion that didn't fade even with long hours of sleep. Doctors came and went, tests were run, results were analyzed, diagnoses were suggested and then dismissed. Nothing seemed to clearly explain what was happening. It was as if Mrs. Sterling's body was slowly shutting down for no apparent reason. Robert Sterling Jr., Helen's only son, was a 42-year-old man, tall, with graying temples, always dressed in impeccable suits. He inherited his father's business acumen and his mother's ambition to always aim higher. His office was on Park Avenue, in one of the city's most modern skyscrapers, with a panoramic view that stretched all the way to the George Washington Bridge on a clear day. Robert's life was a whirlwind of meetings, overseas trips, dinners with investors, and project presentations. His phone never stopped ringing. His schedule was always packed. He sincerely believed he was doing the best for his mother. After all, he had hired the best doctors, ensured she had the best of everything, and most. Importantly, he had brought someone into the home who could care for Helen with full-time dedication. That person was Brenda Miller, a 38-year-old woman, elegant in a way few are. She had appeared in the family's life about 6 months ago, recommended by an agency specializing in private caregivers. Brenda had an impressive resume, a nursing degree, experience with the elderly, impeccable references. But more than that, she had something that won you over at first sight. A warm smile, a soft voice, and the ability to make anyone feel special. Since taking over Mrs. Sterling's care, Brenda had completely reorganized the household routine. She established a strict schedule for meals, medications, and rest periods. She created a control system that seemed perfect. Robert was relieved. Finally, someone competent was taking care of his mother while he ran the family business. What Robert didn't notice, lost in his spreadsheets and contracts, was that his mother was slowly being isolated from the world. Visits from old friends were discouraged. Brenda always had a convincing explanation. Mrs. Sterling was very tired. The doctor recommended complete rest. Any excitement could worsen her condition. The friends, concerned and respectful, eventually accepted. They would call, send flowers, but personal contact became increasingly rare. Inside the mansion, a silent routine took hold. Brenda controlled everything with almost military efficiency. She prepared Mrs. Sterling's meals herself, selected the medications, and organized the day's schedule. And there was always a reason for Mrs. Sterling to remain in her quarters, away from any of the house's activity. It was into this scene that Martha Sanchez entered, a 51-year-old woman, short, with brown skin and hands calloused from work. Martha had been an employee at the house for only 3 months. She had been hired to help with the general cleaning and organization of the mansion, a Herculean task in a place of that size. Martha woke up at 4:30 a.m. every day. She left her home in the Bronx, took 2 crowded buses and a packed subway to arrive on the Upper East Side at 7 o'clock sharp. She was the mother of 3 children, Michael Jr., 23, who worked as a delivery driver, Camilla, 19, a student at a city college studying to be a teacher, and Kevin, 15, still in high school. Her husband, Walter, was a night watchman. They saw each other little, but the love that united them was strong, built on effort and partnership. For Martha, that job was a blessing. The pay was good, better than anything she had ever earned. But more than that, she felt she was finally in a place where she could work with dignity, where her effort would be recognized. She cleaned each room with care, treating every precious object in that house as if it were her own. But Martha had something money can't buy, a sharp intuition, developed over years of observation and a hard life. She knew how to read people. She could sense when something wasn't right, even if no one said a word. And since she had started working in that mansion, something had been deeply bothering Martha. In the first few days, she thought it was just her imagination, but over time, the signs became clearer. Mrs. Sterling was always drowsy, with a glazed look in her eyes. When Martha saw her in the hallways, the old woman walked as if in a trance, holding onto furniture, breathing with difficulty, and always, Brenda was nearby, controlling her every move. Martha began to notice small details. The trash from Mrs. Sterling's room always had strange packaging, small unlabeled vials, ampules that looked like they had been opened in a hurry. The meals prepared by Brenda were left almost untouched on the plate. And whenever Martha got close to Mrs. Sterling's room, Brenda would suddenly appear with that polite smile, but with eyes that clearly said, "You shouldn't be here." One day, Martha was cleaning the second-floor hallway when she heard voices coming from the study. It was Brenda, on the phone. Martha didn't mean to eavesdrop, but something in the woman's tone made her stop. Brenda was speaking softly, but with a coldness that completely contrasted with the sweetness she showed in front of Robert. "Everything is going according to plan. A few more weeks and it will all be settled. She's getting weaker every day, and no one suspects a thing. The son is completely oblivious, perfect. We just need to be patient." Martha felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly moved away, pretending she hadn't heard anything, but her heart was pounding in her chest. Those words echoed in her mind. "Everything is going according to plan. She's getting weaker every day. No one suspects a thing." That night, on the crowded bus ride home, Martha couldn't stop thinking. She knew this kind of situation. She had heard similar stories in her neighborhood, cases of vulnerable people being manipulated, taken advantage of. But here, in this luxurious mansion, surrounded by wealth and security, it seemed impossible. Who would believe her, a simple housekeeper, against a professional as well recommended as Brenda? In the following days, Martha began to watch everything even more closely. She mentally noted the times Brenda entered and left Mrs. Sterling's room. She paid attention to the packaging that appeared in the trash. She listened to the phone conversations, and the more she observed, the more convinced she became that something terrible was happening there. One December morning, with Christmas approaching, Martha entered Mrs. Sterling's room to change the bed linens. The old woman was sitting in the armchair by the window looking out at the garden. When she noticed Martha's presence, Mrs. Sterling turned her head, and her eyes, for a brief moment, seemed to regain some of their old lucidity. "You, dear," Mrs. Sterling said in a weak voice. "You're new here, aren't you?" "Yes, Mrs. Sterling. I've been here for 3 months. My name is Martha." "Martha," the old woman repeated, as if memorizing the name. "Martha, I'm not well. I feel that something is wrong with me, but no one listens to me. No one believes me." Before Martha could respond, Brenda entered the room with a tray. She looked at Martha with that smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Sterling, you're confused again. It's the fatigue. Martha, You can finish your work and let her rest, please." Martha left the room, but Mrs. Sterling's words echoed in her mind. "No one listens to me, no one believes me," and in that moment, Martha made a decision. She didn't know how, she didn't know when, but she was going to find out what was happening. And if necessary, she would be the voice for that old woman whom no one else heard. Christmas preparations began to take over the mansion. Lights were installed in the garden. A gigantic tree was set up in the main living room, and wreaths adorned the doors. Everything seemed perfect, festive, full of hope. But for Martha, all that decoration had something sinister about it. It was as if they were decorating a prison, disguising with glitter and color something rotten that was growing in the shadows. Robert showed up at the mansion one afternoon, bringing gifts and talking excitedly about the Christmas Eve dinner he planned to host. He was so immersed in his plans that he barely noticed his mother's condition. Brenda accompanied him, always helpful, always with the right word, always assuring him that everything was under control. Martha watched everything from a distance, cleaning, organizing, being as invisible as she had always been. But inside her, a determination was growing. She didn't know who Brenda really was, or what she was planning. But she knew with absolute certainty that Mrs. Sterling was in danger, and that if she didn't do anything, no one would. That night, when she got home, Martha hugged her children tighter than usual. Camilla noticed and asked if everything was okay. Martha smiled, saying she was just tired, but the truth was she was scared, scared of what she might discover, scared of the consequences. But there was something stronger than fear, the certainty that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, is what makes us human. And so while the city of New York continued its frantic pace, while Christmas approached with promises of peace and unity, inside that mansion on the Upper East Side, a silent battle was beginning. On one side, powerful forces driven by dark interests. On the other, a simple woman armed only with her courage and her conscience. Are you enjoying this story? Tell me your opinion of this story and how you think it will end. The days passed and December moved forward, bringing with it that typical East Coast winter chill. The afternoons were crisp, the sky often a flat gray that threatened snow but rarely delivered. Inside the Upper East Side mansion, the heating systems worked tirelessly, keeping every room at the perfect temperature. But there was a coldness inside that no thermostat could control. Martha woke up earlier each day, anxious. Walter noticed his wife wasn't sleeping well, that she tossed and turned, that she sighed deeply in the middle of the night. He asked if everything was okay at work, and Martha said yes, but without much conviction. How could she explain to her husband what she was still trying to understand herself? How could she talk about intuitions, about glances, about stray words that, when put together, formed a terrifying puzzle? At work, Martha started to be more careful. She noticed that Brenda watched her frequently, that her movements were closely monitored. So Martha pretended to be just what everyone expected her to be, a simple, dedicated employee who cleaned, organized, and didn't ask questions. But behind this facade of normalcy, Martha was investigating. When Brenda left for her appointments or errands, Martha took the opportunity to get closer to Mrs. Sterling's room. She didn't touch anything, just observed. She noticed a locked cabinet next to the bed. She saw that some drawers had recent marks of being opened and closed in a hurry. She saw that the trash can in the private bathroom always had torn packaging, as if someone wanted to hide what was being used. One day, while cleaning the hallway, Martha found a small vial that had rolled under a piece of furniture. It was a dark glass bottle, unlabeled, with remnants of a clear liquid at the bottom. She picked it up, wrapped it in a paper towel, and discreetly put it in her apron pocket. She didn't know what she would do with it, but something inside her told her to keep it, to preserve that piece of evidence. Mrs. Sterling, for her part, was becoming more and more confused. There were moments when she seemed lucid, when her eyes shone with their usual intelligence, but these moments were becoming rarer and briefer. Most of the time she remained in a state of lethargy, as if living in slow motion, as if the world around her were just a blur of meaningless colors and sounds. Robert visited his mother 2 or 3 times a week, always in a rush, always taking calls in the middle of their conversation, always promising he would stay longer next time. He saw his mother wasting away, But Brenda always had an explanation. It was the natural process of aging. The doctors were doing everything they could. It was a matter of patience and care. And Robert, overwhelmed with the responsibilities of the company, wanted to believe these explanations because they relieved him of the guilt of not being present. It was on a rainy December afternoon that something happened. Martha was on the ground floor organizing the pantry when she heard raised voices coming from upstairs. It was rare for any kind of conflict to occur in that house where everything seemed so controlled. She went up the stairs discreetly and saw down the hall that the study door was ajar. Inside were Brenda and another woman Martha didn't know. She was an older woman, perhaps in her 50s, elegant with impeccable blonde hair and a posture that exuded confidence. The two were talking in low voices, but the tone was tense. "You're being reckless," the blonde woman said. "We're too close now. There can't be any mistakes." "I know what I'm doing," Brenda replied firmly. "Everything is under control. The old woman is completely dependent. The son has no clue. We just need to wait a little longer." "And this new employee, the one who's always walking around the house?" Brenda let out a dry laugh. "Her? Just some maid. She has no education, no influence. Even if she suspected something, who would listen to her? Relax, Veronica, nothing is going to go wrong." Martha felt her blood run cold. She backed away silently, returning to the pantry, but her mind was in a turmoil. So there was someone else involved. And they spoke of Mrs. Sterling as if she were an object, an obstacle to be removed. Anger grew inside Martha, but along with the anger came fear. She really was just some maid. Who would believe her? That night, on her way home, Martha made a decision. She needed help, but she didn't know who to turn to. She couldn't go directly to Robert because Brenda had him completely convinced of her competence. She couldn't call the police without concrete proof. She needed someone who understood the situation, who could help her make the right connections. It was Camilla, her daughter, who gave her the idea. "Mom, why don't you try to find Dr. Morgan? He was the family's trusted doctor before this Brenda person showed up, right? If he knows what's happening, maybe he can do something." Martha hugged her daughter tightly. That was it. Dr. Albert Morgan. He had been mentioned a few times by Mrs. Francis, the old housekeeper who had worked at the mansion for over 20 years and had been let go shortly after Brenda took over. Mrs. Francis had commented before she left that Dr. Morgan was like a son to Mrs. Sterling, that he had been her doctor for decades, but suddenly he had just stopped coming to the house. The next day, Martha got Dr. Morgan's contact information from Mrs. Francis. She called his office, nervous, mentally rehearsing what she would say. When she finally got through to him, her voice was trembling. "Doctor, you don't know me. My name is Martha and I work at Mrs. Helen Sterling's house. I really need to talk to you about her. Please, it's urgent." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Dr. Morgan answered, his voice was heavy with concern. "I've been trying to speak with Helen for months, but they always tell me she can't have visitors, that she's too frail. What's going on?" That's how an unlikely alliance began. Dr. Albert Morgan was a 62-year-old man, a renowned cardiologist, who had been treating Helen since she was a middle-aged woman. He knew her complete medical history, knew about every health issue she had faced, every treatment she had undergone, and for the past few months he had been systematically pushed away. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe far from the Upper East Side. It was a Saturday morning, and Martha told her family she had some personal errands to run. When she arrived at the cafe, she found Dr. Morgan already waiting for her. He was a tall man with completely white hair and piercing blue eyes that conveyed both kindness and intelligence. Martha told him everything. The observations, the conversations she had overheard, Mrs. Sterling's condition, the isolation, the strange packaging, the vial she had saved. Dr. Morgan listened in silence, but his face grew darker and darker. When Martha finished speaking, the doctor took the vial she had brought, examined it against the light, and sighed deeply. "I suspected something was wrong. Helen has always been a strong woman, healthy for her age. Suddenly she starts showing symptoms that make no sense, and I'm removed from the case. This Brenda Miller appeared out of nowhere with impeccable credentials, But I tried to investigate and couldn't confirm half the references she provided. What can we do, Doctor? Martha asked with tears in her eyes. She's suffering, and no one is doing anything. Dr. Morgan thought for a moment. We need concrete proof. I'll have the contents of this vial analyzed. And you need to keep observing but be very careful. These people, whoever they are, won't hesitate to get rid of anyone who gets in their way. Do you understand the risk you're taking? Martha nodded. I understand. But I can't stand by and watch an innocent person suffer. My mother always taught me that you might not have money, you might not have an education, but you have to have character. And character is doing the right thing, even when it's hard. In the days that followed, Martha and Dr. Morgan kept in constant contact through discreet text messages. The lab results from the vial confirmed their suspicions. There were traces of a powerful sedative, the kind that should only be used in hospital settings and with a strict prescription. No one in their right mind would give that to a frail, elderly woman without a very specific reason. Meanwhile, inside the mansion, the situation was escalating. Christmas was just 2 weeks away. The tree sparkled in the living room, lights blinked outside, and Christmas carols played softly through the sound system. But for Martha, each day was more tense than the last. She noticed that Brenda and Veronica, the blonde woman, were meeting frequently. Sometimes at the mansion, sometimes Brenda would leave and return hours later. Martha managed to take a discreet photo of Veronica and sent it to Dr. Morgan, who promised to investigate who she was. One afternoon, Robert showed up at the mansion with a lawyer. They were locked in the study for hours. When they came out, Robert looked disturbed. Brenda was with him, always helpful, always present. Martha, who was sweeping the hallway, overheard fragments of the conversation. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing, Robert said, clearly distressed. You are, Brenda replied in that sweet, firm voice. Your mother is no longer capable of making decisions. It's your duty to protect the family's assets. The power of attorney is just a formality to make everything easier. Martha almost dropped the broom. Power of attorney. They were making Mrs. Sterling sign a power of attorney. And if she was as sedated as she seemed, she probably didn't even know what she was signing. That night, Martha called Dr. Morgan, desperate. He, in turn, had news about Veronica. She was a lawyer, but she had been investigated years ago for involvement in fraud cases against the elderly. She was never convicted, due to lack of evidence, but her name appeared in several lawsuits. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Brenda and Veronica were working together. The plan was to isolate Mrs. Sterling, keep her sedated and confused, convince Robert to transfer legal powers, and then somehow gain access to the family fortune. It was a sophisticated, carefully planned and coldly executed scam. But they still needed definitive proof, something that could be presented to the authorities, something that would leave no doubt. Dr. Morgan suggested they try to collect samples of the medications being given to Mrs. Sterling, or even record one, of the conversations between Brenda and Veronica. It was risky, but it was their only option. Martha knew that time was running out. Christmas was approaching, and with it, something she sensed would be the final stage of these women's plan. She didn't know exactly what they intended to do, but she felt with that intuition that never failed her that the danger was growing with each passing day. That night, before going to sleep, Martha prayed. She asked for protection, for courage, for God to guide her on this mission she never imagined she would have to face. And as she prayed, she thought of Mrs. Sterling, frail and alone in that enormous mansion, surrounded by people who should have been protecting her, but who were, in fact, her worst threats. The battle was just beginning, and Martha knew she would have to be smarter, braver, and more determined than ever. Because on the other side were not just two ambitious women, but an entire system that allowed vulnerable people to be exploited, that allowed trust to be used as a weapon, and that allowed the silence of those who should speak to become an accomplice to evil. The week before Christmas was almost unbearably tense. New York was in its typical end-of-year frenzy, crowded malls, chaotic traffic, people rushing everywhere for last-minute gifts. But inside the Upper East Side mansion, time seemed to move at a different speed, as if every second were laden with imminent danger. Martha arrived at work with a heavy heart. She knew she had to act, but every step had to be calculated. One mistake, one word out of place, one suspicious glance, and everything could fall apart. And it wasn't just her at risk. Mrs. Sterling depended on her. Dr. Morgan was counting on her. There was no room for error. It was on a Monday morning that Martha got her first big break. Brenda had to leave to run an urgent errand in the city, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't leave anyone specific to supervise Mrs. Sterling. It was a rare chance, perhaps the only one Martha would get. As soon as Brenda left, Martha went up to the second floor, her heart pounding. She knocked softly on Mrs. Sterling's bedroom door and entered. The old woman was sitting in her armchair looking out the window without really seeing anything. When she noticed Martha, she turned her head slowly. "Martha," she said, and there was something different in her voice, a little more clarity, as if for a brief moment the fog that enveloped her mind had lifted. "Mrs. Sterling, I need to talk to you," Martha said, approaching and kneeling beside the armchair. "Do you remember me? I work here and I'm very worried about you." Mrs. Sterling's eyes filled with tears. "I know something is wrong with me. I feel it. But when I try to talk, no one listens. My son... Where is my son? Mr. Robert is working, but he cares about you, Mrs. Sterling. The problem is there are people here who don't have your best interests at heart, people who are making you feel this way." Mrs. Sterling grabbed Martha's hand with surprising strength. "That woman, Brenda. She gives me medicine that makes me dizzy. I try to refuse, but she says it's the doctor's orders. But I don't remember any doctor examining me." "Dr. Morgan, do you remember him?" Martha asked. Mrs. Sterling's eyes lit up with recognition. "Albert, my dear Albert, where is he? Why doesn't he come to see me anymore?" "They've kept him away from you, but he's trying to help. We are trying to help. But we need proof, Mrs. Sterling. The next time Brenda gives you medicine, could you pretend to take it but not swallow it? Or could you let a little of it fall into a cup or onto a tissue?" Mrs. Sterling nodded, determination appearing in her tired gaze. "I'll try. I'm not the strong woman I once was, but I still have enough strength to fight." Martha was about to say more when she heard the sound of the front door opening. Brenda was back early. Martha stood up quickly, fluffed the pillows on the bed as if she were just tidying the room, and left seconds before Brenda came up the stairs. In the following days, something changed. Mrs. Sterling, with the quiet strength that only those who were once strong possess, began to resist in subtle ways. When Brenda gave her the medications, she would pretend to swallow but spit them out later. She would purposefully let a little of the liquid spill onto a handkerchief, and whenever she could, when she was minimally lucid, she would jot things down in a small notebook she kept hidden under her mattress. Martha managed to collect these handkerchiefs and take them to Dr. Morgan, who had the contents analyzed. Each analysis confirmed the same thing: powerful sedatives, doses inappropriate for a person of Mrs. Sterling's age, dangerous combinations of substances. It was the evidence they needed. But as they built their case, Brenda and Veronica accelerated their plans. Robert appeared at the mansion one afternoon, again accompanied by the lawyer. This time they brought papers for Mrs. Sterling to sign. Martha watched from a distance, pretending to dust the furniture in the hallway. As she saw Brenda practically guide the old woman's hand to sign documents, she was clearly in no condition to understand. When everyone left the room, Martha went in quickly. Mrs. Sterling was crying silently. "They made me sign things. I don't know what it was. I tried to read, but the letters were blurry in front of me." Martha hugged the old woman, feeling the fragility of the body that had once been so strong. "It's going to be okay, Mrs. Sterling. Dr. Morgan is taking care of everything. We won't let them hurt you." That evening, Dr. Morgan called an urgent meeting. Besides Martha, he brought someone else, Dr. Frances Campbell, a specialist in gerontology and also in cases of elder exploitation. She was a woman in her 40s, with a determined gaze and a firm posture. She worked for an organization that defended the rights of vulnerable people. When Dr. Morgan showed them all the evidence they had collected, Dr. Campbell was visibly shocked. "This is more serious than I imagined. We have a clear case of manipulation, improper sedation, and likely attempted fraud." But we need to act fast. If they've already obtained power of attorney and signatures on documents, the next step could be even more drastic. What do you mean? Martha asked, already dreading the answer. Dr. Campbell sighed. In cases like this, when the perpetrators realize they're being discovered, they might try to accelerate the final plan. We need to get Mrs. Sterling out of that house immediately and involve the authorities. But what about Robert? Dr. Morgan questioned. He's the son. He has legal authority. How are we going to convince him that he's being manipulated? That's when they had an idea. Dr. Campbell suggested they organize an intervention, a meeting where they would present all the evidence to Robert, but it had to be done carefully, away from Brenda's influence. They needed the element of surprise. The plan was set. Martha would convince Robert to come to the mansion at a specific time when Brenda was out. She would make up an excuse, say that Mrs. Sterling was urgently asking for him. When he arrived, he would find not only his mother, but also Dr. Morgan and Dr. Campbell, with all the evidence laid out. It was risky. If Brenda found out, everything could fall apart, but it was the only chance they had. The chosen day was Christmas Eve. Brenda had an appointment scheduled that would take at least 2 hours. Martha had confirmed this by discreetly checking the calendar in the kitchen. Robert was contacted and agreed to come, worried about what might be happening to his mother. When the time came, Martha's heart was racing. She was at the mansion, overseeing everything, as Brenda got ready to leave. The woman was especially elegant that day, as if she knew something important was about to happen. Before leaving, she looked at Martha with that fake smile. "You'll be here until I get back?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, I'll take care of the house." "Good. And Martha, don't let anyone go up to Mrs. Sterling's room. She needs absolute rest. Understood?" "Understood," Martha replied, but inside she felt a growing rage. The woman was so cynical, so cold. As soon as Brenda left, Martha called Dr. Morgan and Dr. Campbell. They arrived 15 minutes later, carrying folders full of documents and lab reports. Robert arrived shortly after, worried and confused. "What's going on here?" he asked upon seeing Dr. Morgan. "Doctor, you haven't visited my mother in months." "And do you know why?" Dr. Morgan replied, his voice thick with restrained emotion. "Because I was systematically kept away, and now I'm going to show you why." For the next hour, in the mansion's study, Dr. Morgan and Dr. Campbell presented all the evidence, the toxicology reports showing the inappropriate substances, Martha's notes on the suspicious behaviors, the information on Veronica's past, the documents Mrs. Sterling had been forced to sign. Robert listened to it all in silence, his face growing paler and paler. He ran his hands through his hair, took deep breaths, as if trying to process something impossible to believe. "No, it can't be. Brenda was recommended by a respected agency. She has all the credentials." Dr. Campbell opened another folder. "The credentials are fake, Robert. We investigated. The agency that recommended her was created just 8 months ago, has a fictitious address, and the owner doesn't exist in any official records. It was all a very well-orchestrated sham." "And my mother?" Robert swallowed hard. "What were they doing to my mother?" "Sedating her, isolating her, preparing the ground to take control of her assets. With the power of attorney you signed, and the documents your mother was forced to sign, they would have had access to everything. And your mother, growing weaker and weaker, would eventually have been unable to resist or report them." Robert stood up, staggering. "We need to go upstairs. I need to see my mother." They went up together. Mrs. Sterling was in her armchair, but when she saw her son enter accompanied by Dr. Morgan, something in her eyes changed. She held out her arms, and Robert ran to embrace her. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't see it. I'm sorry I was so absent." Mrs. Sterling was crying, and for the first time in months they were tears of relief. "My son, my dear son." It was at that moment they heard the sound of the front door opening. Brenda was back earlier than expected. Martha ran down the stairs and saw the woman entering, followed by Veronica. When Brenda saw Martha, her face changed completely. The fake smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "Where is Robert?" "His car is in the driveway." Before Martha could answer, Robert appeared at the top of the stairs, accompanied by Dr. Morgan and Dr. Campbell. "I'm here, Brenda, and I think we have a lot to talk about." What followed was a tense confrontation. Brenda tried to maintain her facade, but when presented with the evidence, when she realized there was no way out, the mask finally fell. She and Veronica tried to argue, to threaten, but Robert had already called the police. When the officers arrived, Brenda and Veronica were taken in for questioning. Documents were seized, investigations were opened, and Mrs. Sterling, finally free from her silent prison, began her recovery. That Christmas Eve, as the city lights twinkled outside and churches rang their bells, there was a peace in the Upper East Side mansion that hadn't been felt in a long time. Mrs. Sterling slept soundly, finally free of the substances that had held her captive in her own body. And by her side, watching over her, was her son Robert, who promised himself he would never again let work keep him from what truly mattered. Christmas that year was different from all the others. There was no elaborate dinner that Robert had planned, no dozens of guests, no cold formality that had always marked the holidays at the mansion. Instead, there was simplicity, truth, and for the first time in a long time, genuine love. Mrs. Sterling spent the first few days after the revelation under strict medical observation. Dr. Morgan brought in a trusted team who examined her thoroughly, running detailed tests to assess the damage caused by the substances she had been forced to ingest. The news was both alarming and hopeful. Her body had been severely affected, but with proper care and time, she could make an almost complete recovery. During those first days, Robert practically lived at the mansion. He cancelled meetings, postponed trips, delegated responsibilities. For the first time in years, his absolute priority was not the company, but his mother. And in this shift of focus, he began to discover things about himself that he had forgotten. He spent hours by Mrs. Sterling's bedside, just talking. She, little by little, was regaining her lucidity, and with it came memories. She told stories of Robert's childhood, of the times when her husband was still alive, of the dreams they had built together. And Robert, listening to those stories, realized how much he had distanced himself not only from his mother, but from his own roots. One afternoon, while watching his mother sleep peacefully, Robert had a conversation with Dr. Morgan in the mansion's garden. The Christmas trees were still lit, but now their light seemed to bring true hope. "I was a fool, Doctor, a fool blinded by ambition and the arrogance of thinking that money and comfort were enough." Dr. Morgan placed a hand on the younger man's shoulder. "You're not the first, nor will you be the last, to make that mistake, Robert. The important thing is that you saw it in time. Your mother is still here, she can still recover. Many people don't get that second chance. And who do I owe that to? To Martha, an employee I barely know who had no obligation to take a risk, but who did what I, her son, should have done." Martha, in those days, tried to maintain her normal routine. She didn't want recognition, she wasn't seeking the spotlight. But Robert would not let her courage go unnoticed. He called her for a conversation in the study, and when Martha entered, nervous, thinking she might be let go now that the crisis was over, she found something very different. "Martha," Robert began, his voice thick, with emotion, "I don't even know where to begin to thank you for what you did. You saved my mother, you saved my family, and you did it by risking your job, your safety, without asking for anything in return." Martha, with tears in her eyes, replied, "I just did what was right, Mr. Robert. Mrs. Sterling is a good person. She didn't deserve to suffer like that. And it wasn't just me. There was Dr. Morgan, Dr. Campbell. A lot of people helped. Even so, you were the one who took the first step. You were the one who had courage when everyone else looked away. And for that I want you to know that from this day on, you are no longer just an employee in this house. You are part of this family." Robert then did something that surprised Martha. He offered her a completely different position. She would become the household administrator, with a fair salary and all the necessary benefits. More than that, he guaranteed that Martha's children would have full scholarships to good schools and that any of the family's needs would be met. Martha cried. She cried with relief, with gratitude, with happiness. But mostly she cried because she finally felt that justice had been done, that good had prevailed, that her faith in doing the right thing had been rewarded. Meanwhile, the investigation into Brenda and Veronica moved forward. The police discovered they were part of a larger ring, that there were other victims, other families who had been deceived. Forged documents, hidden bank accounts, a complex web of fraud was unraveled. The two women would face long trials, and their chances of freedom were slim. The story made the newspapers. It became a story on the evening news. Martha, who had always been invisible, suddenly found herself in the center of attention. Reporters wanted to interview her. Television shows invited her on. But she refused most of them. She gave only one interview to a local paper where she simply said, "I did what anyone should do. Caring for others shouldn't be the exception, it should be the rule." Mrs. Francis, the former housekeeper who had been dismissed by Brenda, returned to the mansion. Robert sought her out personally, apologized for not having investigated her sudden departure, and invited her back to work if she wanted. Mrs. Francis accepted, and it was emotional to see her reunion with Mrs. Sterling. The two women hugged and cried, a friendship of decades being restored. As January arrived, Mrs. Sterling improved visibly. Her strength returned little by little. She began to walk in the garden, to sit on the porch, to sunbathe, to smile again. And with her physical recovery came an emotional transformation. She realized she had been given a second chance, and she was determined to make the most of it. One January morning, with the strong sun typical of a winter thaw, Mrs. Sterling gathered in the garden the people who had saved her life. There were Martha and her family, Dr. Morgan, Dr. Campbell, Mrs. Francis, and of course Robert. "I don't know if I can express in words what I feel," Mrs. Sterling began, her voice still a bit weak but full of emotion. "You gave me more than my life back. You showed me that there is still goodness in this world, that there are still people willing to fight for what is right, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous." She looked especially at Martha. "You, dear Martha, came from a place where life isn't easy, where every day is a struggle, and yet you found the time and courage to fight for me too. You taught me that dignity has nothing to do with money or social status. It has to do with character, and you have more character than many people I've met in the highest circles of society." Martha was crying, as was everyone present. Mrs. Sterling continued, "That's why I've decided to make some changes in my life. I'm going to create a foundation with a significant part of my assets dedicated to protecting elderly people in vulnerable situations. It will be called the Helen Sterling Foundation for Elder Protection, and I want you, all of you who saved me, to be on the board of directors." There was a moment of emotional silence, and then everyone hugged. It was more than a personal victory. It was the transformation of a near tragedy into something that could help hundreds, perhaps thousands of other people. Robert also underwent a profound transformation. He restructured his company, hired trusted managers to take over some of his responsibilities, and began dedicating half of his time to the foundation his mother was creating. He discovered there was more satisfaction in making a difference in people's lives than in simply accumulating more zeros in his bank account. And Martha, the unlikely hero of this whole story, remained who she had always been, a simple, hard-working woman with a huge heart. She accepted the new position, but she didn't change her essence. She continued to take public transportation from time to time, continued living in the Bronx, continued to be close to her neighbors. The difference was that now she had the resources to help not only her family but also her community. Her son Michael Jr. got a better job. Camilla got a scholarship for her master's degree. Kevin went to a quality private school, and Walter, her hard-working husband, was finally able to reduce his workload and spend more time with his family. The Sanchez family's life had changed, not because they had become rich, but because they finally had the opportunities they had always deserved. Months later, on an autumn afternoon, with New York dressed in orange hues from the setting sun, Mrs. Sterling and Martha were sitting in the garden having tea. They had developed a genuine friendship, a connection that transcended social classes and age, differences. "You know, Martha," Mrs. Sterling said, "I spent my whole life building an empire, accumulating assets, fighting for recognition, and in the end, the person who saved me wasn't someone from my social circle, not one of my friends of decades. It was you, a woman I barely knew, who had nothing to gain but everything to lose." Martha smiled. "That's because we don't choose to do the right thing thinking about what we'll gain, Mrs. Sterling. We do it because it's the right thing to do. It's as simple as that." Mrs. Sterling took Martha's hand. "You're wise. You know that? Wiser than many professors I've known, many executives I've negotiated with. Life has taught you things that aren't in books. And you taught me that it's never too late to start over, to change, to be a better person. Look at you now, creating this foundation, helping so many people. That's a real legacy." The two women sat there, in companionable silence, watching the garden, the trees swaying gently in the wind. And in that moment, they both knew they had been blessed. Mrs. Sterling for having been saved, Martha for having had the courage to save, and both for having found in each other something precious, a true friendship, built not on convenience or interest, but on mutual respect and shared humanity. The story of Helen and Martha spread. It became an example in lectures, was told in schools, and inspired other people not to remain silent in the face of injustice. And the Helen Sterling Foundation for Elder Protection grew, helped thousands of people, and prevented other similar cases from happening. Years later, when they looked back, everyone involved in that story agreed on one thing. Sometimes the angels God sends don't come with wings and halos. They come with a work apron, calloused hands, and a pure heart. They come disguised as ordinary people, doing extraordinary things simply because they believe it's the right thing to do. And so, in that giant city called New York, where millions of stories happen every day, this particular story of courage, justice, and redemption was etched, not in the newspapers, not in the history books, but where it really matters, in the hearts of the people who lived and witnessed it, and in the lives that were transformed by it, because in the end what remains are not material possessions, not titles or social positions. What remains are the bonds we build, the lives we touch, the good we do when no one is watching. And in that regard, Martha Sanchez, a simple housekeeper from a mansion in New York, was richer than any fortune could measure. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Mrs. Sterling and Martha has touched your heart. If you were moved by this narrative of courage, justice, and compassion, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest and truest side of the human soul, showing that good can always prevail when brave people decide not to stay silent. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life.